There are two possibilities here. Jesus was an historical figure who was subsequently mythologized, or Jesus was a mythological figure who was subsequently historicized. This simplicity is complicated by the fact that the first proposition is a religious dogma, namely the doctrine of the Incarnation. As a matter of dogma, Jesus was an historical man. I'm in the latter camp, by far the minority, the so-called mythicist viewpoint, which, if it wasn't for dogmatic complications, would be seen as at least reasonable and not ridiculous. This view proposes that there was no historical figure, Jesus as such, but that there was a mythology of such a figure, and that the myth was made into or solidified into history. I contend this is a natural reading of Christian foundation texts. In Paul's letters, in the Epistle to the Hebrews, in many other texts, canonical and otherwise, we encounter a celestial cosmic Christ unattached to any sort of solid historical figure. Many of the earliest Christian founders knew nothing of things like the virgin birth or any of the events from the life of Jesus. He is like a disembodied spirit. This is accounted for by so-called Gnosticism, meaning a Platonic dualism that is a Hellenic habit of mind. Orthodoxy at length insists there is no dualism. Jesus was fully God and fully man, a celestial figure, yes, but an incarnate man who appeared in history. But we can also see in Christian texts the myth being historicized. Textual interpolations anchoring Jesus to a particular time and place are plain to see. If we remove them, we just have a narrative of a wandering miracle worker of whom we are not given any real particulars. He's a vague, mysterious and ethereal character, and not dissimilar to wonder-working characters in pagan literature. He is frankly somewhat generic. But a real effort has been made, secondarily, to anchor this generic character to a particular time and place in history, to make him historical. Why he had to be historical, theologically or politically or for whatever reasons, is another question. But textually, it seems clear to me that there has been a process of historicizing. The primitive Jesus narrative had a celestial Christ, such as appeared to Paul in vision. Orthodoxy insisted he was an historical man, incarnate. A reasonable reading of the evidence is that we have a myth made history, not a history made myth. It is manifestly silly for some archaeologists to claim he has dug up Jesus' sandal. Jesus was a mythic figure placed into that landscape. There are no artifacts. Nor are there any independent witnesses. It's hard to believe, if it wasn't for dogmatics, that anyone would give the Flavian testimony a second look. The absence of evidence is overwhelming. It is an argument from silence, but the silence is deafening. All the same, what we do find in portraits of Jesus is a composite picture of the various messianic pretenders and Jewish sectarian leaders throughout the Troubles in Roman Judea, from the Maccabean period through to the Bar Kokhba revolt. Stories and episodes and motifs attached to one or other of these troublemakers in other sources become attached to this Jesus figure in the Christian narrative. He appears as a conflation of various characters, just as he appears as a conflation of various Old Testament figures. The figure is loaded up with allusions and associations. But there is no historical Jesus underneath, no humble carpenter from Galilee. He is a personification of the messianic ideology that drove Jewish rebellions from the Maccabees to the Bar Kokhba revolt, but a benign and counter-revolutionary post-war personification. A man to which is attached, conflated together into one, the messianic pretenders and prophecies. Noting that in my view the whole thing only comes together in the mid-2nd century, after the Bar Kokhba war. The entire matter is profoundly complex. But what does it look like if we stand back far enough? It looks like a myth that was made into a history. That is the mythicist position, simply put. It is a justifiable position based on the evidence, and in some ways fairly obvious as a possibility. Again, there are only two possibilities here. Jesus was an historical figure who was mythologized, or Jesus is a mythological figure who was historicized. We can muster good arguments for both of these scenarios, no doubt. But until recent times, the mythic position was not even on the radar. So comprehensive are the assumptions of the Christian tradition, even among secular scholars. There are paradigms of study. The prevailing paradigm has excluded even the possibility of the mythicist position. But there are now various iterations of mythicism abroad. Some of them dwell on the fringes, admittedly. Some of them are more respectable and substantial. They are all up against the momentum of a 2,000-year religious tradition of incarnationism. I prefer not to engage in that polemic, but rather think through a paradigm of study that permits the view that Jesus was not historical. His historicity is a construction of the Christian tradition, the early church in contest with so-called Gnostic versions of a celestial Christ. Historicizing Jesus is anti-Gnostic in this way. We can see how it happened. But the celestial Jesus we see in Paul, and who we find in Marcion, is what we start with. The historicism of orthodoxy was imposed. We find it in early Christian apologetics. Christianity is superior to the pagan religions because Jesus was a real man, flesh and blood, not a myth, not a phantom, not like the Greco-Roman gods, not mythic time but real time, historical time. In Christian apologetics, this is a key point of distinction. But the claim of a real man in history is false. The Christians counter Greco-Roman mythopeics with historical myth or mythic history, a myth made to look like history. Fabulous miracles are presented as historical facts. We can give a plausible account of the whole process. For many centuries of Christian history, anyway, the Church revered the cosmic Christ, not the biblical Christ. The concentration on the historical Jesus with his suffering and his humanity at the Incarnation is part of the new devotion developed in the late Middle Ages and early modernity. The Church has not always treated Jesus as starkly historical, but rather as a cosmic figure who personifies a theological order. The quest for the historical Jesus, not being satisfied with a mere theological one, is a very modern one, and we should say a Protestant concern. Mythicist perspectives, of course, will attract atheists and assorted Christian haters, especially in the contemporary American context, although the British can be fervent atheists too. I hasten to say that is not my agenda at all, and I don't think it advances the mythicist paradigm as a serious platform for study. Skepticism is one thing, cynicism is another. Mythicism is prone to be immature, when in reality it's not a big claim that Jesus was mythic and the myth was historicized, was affixed to history. It is not by any means a perverse or unwarranted idea, but it is effectively outside the Christian camp. It is post-Christian necessarily, and for that reason we find it gaining ground in our post-Christian impasse. Which was it? Jesus was an historical figure who was subsequently mythologized, or Jesus was a mythological figure who was subsequently historicized? The quest for the historical Jesus should at least include the second possibility, that the quest ends not in history but in myth. Add to the quest for the historical Jesus the possibility that the quest ends not in history but in myth, and start the quest again. It should be added, though, that the mythicist viewpoint is not confined to this particular question. It's open to all cases of mythic history, seeing it as a regular habit in religiosity more widely considered.